Welcome to TVB News. Hong Kong logged 1,917 COVID infections today, including 118 imported cases. Various COVID clusters continue to grow, and health authorities have warned of a further increase in the number of cases. Christy Khan reports.
Two more patrons of Victoria Harbour restaurant in Tuen Mun have come down with COVID-19. A total of 42 people, including 4 close contacts, have so far been linked to the infection cluster there. Futai Elderly Home in Tuen Mun has reported 3 more positive cases. Health authorities suspect the cases may be linked to the restaurant, as 2 care home workers had been there recently.
Both are suspected carriers of the BA.2.12.1 subvariant. The whole genome sequencing result is still pending, but they may be linked cases.
Another 4 residential care homes have reported COVID infections involving both residents and carers. Around 80 people were sent to quarantine. Health officials also reported some schools have to suspend certain classes after recording small-scale outbreaks. 1 staff member and 3 students who live in a dormitory of St. Stephen's College in Stanley tested positive for COVID. 9 people who live on the same floor have been sent to quarantine. Officials said they might have got infected in the community.
For St. Stephen's College, we haven't found any link with previous cases. People may have got infected in the community, and then the virus found its way into the boarding section of the school. The link between the cases will require further investigation before we can tell.
2 more staff members of the Prince of Wales Hospital's oncology ward have been diagnosed with COVID, bringing the total to 8. Christy Khan, TVB News.
Macau reported 71 new COVID cases today, with a total of 261 infections having been recorded so far in this latest outbreak. The latest reported cases involve 10 different infection clusters. As the number of confirmed infections continues to rise, the government has decided to conduct a 3rd round of mass COVID screening. The screening will be conducted between tomorrow and Tuesday. The authorities said the new round of screening was suggested by the team of mainland respiratory disease expert Zhong Nanshan. The enclave has already conducted 2 rounds of mass screening over the past week. The police received a report at around 5 a.m. of national flags hung at Ping Shek Estate in East Kowloon being damaged or potentially stolen. After an initial investigation, the police found that 12 national flags hanging in the yard of the estate's Lam Shek house were damaged. Furthermore, 2 flags that were hanging at the estate's Lam Shek house and Kam Shek house, respectively, were allegedly stolen. An investigation is underway, and the police have yet to arrest anyone. Meanwhile, as July 1st approaches, the police have further heightened security in areas surrounding the Hong Kong Convention and Exhibition Centre. Water-filled barriers have been placed around the centre, while there is also a heavier police presence in the vicinity. As Hong Kong is poised to reach the quarter-century anniversary of the handover, former Chief Executive Leung Chun-ying dismissed concerns that Beijing's increasingly vocal remarks on the SAR's governance undermines the city's high degree of autonomy. Jackie Lin with more.
With the 25th anniversary of Hong Kong's handover just a few days away, many Hong Kong people are concerned about 2 major issues, including Beijing's increasing influence on the city and COVID-related border restrictions. Former Chief Executive Leung Chun-ying, who is also a vice chairman of the National Committee of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, spoke to TVB News and discussed these matters. While the SAR has been promised a high degree of autonomy, Beijing has increasingly weighed in on the city's issues, with examples including the imposition of the national security law, the reform of the electoral system, and comments on the direction that the SAR should move towards. Leung says this doesn't mean the high degree of autonomy principle has been compromised.
What the central people's government have been doing in recent years by voicing the expectations of the performance of the Hong Kong SAR government is in complete compliance with the articles of the Basic Law.
Though that's not what the international media has been portraying.
There might be that perception. There might even be the possibility of Western politicians and media trying to put China and Hong Kong, which is part of China, on the defensive by making such allegations. But anyone who have these allegations should really point to which article of the Basic Law is not being followed.
The tensions have also led to several principal officials in the incoming administration being on Washington's sanction list. The former chief executive believes that won't be a big problem.
The world outside of the United States, I'm pleased to say, is really big enough for Hong Kong and the government that leads Hong Kong and the senior officials that form the Hong Kong government to operate and operate effectively. The ASEAN countries, which is very close to Hong Kong, is now our second largest trading partner after the mainland of China.
On the prospect of border reopening, he believes the local pandemic situation is key.
The living with the virus policy, direction from around the world, and the COVID-0 policy on the mainland, they're apparently mutually exclusive. Do you think we have to choose one over another when it comes to border reopening?
Well, I think obviously if we have the best of both worlds, we can sort of open to the international community and open to the mainland at the same time, fine. But I think the mainland has the right to say that whatever you do, if your pandemic situation is beyond a certain point, then we can't lift the quarantine requirement.
Considering the well-being and health of the public, he says the mainland has the right not to ease border restrictions. Jackie Lin, TVB News.
Overseas, Russia launched a concerted missile attack against the Ukraine capital, Kiev, early Sunday, wounding at least 5 people. It comes at a difficult time as Ukraine has been forced to pull out troops from Severodonetsk in the Donbass as Russian separatists took full control. Matthew Bray reports.
Russia attacked western Kyiv early Sunday morning with up to 14 missiles. Before this morning, Kyiv had not faced any major Russian attacks since June the 5th. Some of the missiles struck the Shevchenkivsky district, home to universities, restaurants and art galleries. An apartment block and a kindergarten were hit. Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko said rescue work was ongoing. Russia launched its war on Ukraine on February the 24th, but abandoned an early advance on Kyiv after meeting fierce resistance. The latest strikes come at a time when Ukraine is losing its own territory to Russia. These Ukraine fighters have pulled out of Severodonetsk as Moscow-backed separatists took the holdout chemical plant. Speaking to Sky News, the Naval Infantry Marines commander said 80% of the professional soldiers with him were either dead or injured. The new recruits, less prepared, have to be constantly trained. The Ukrainians have been forced to retreat to Lysychansk, also under Russian attack, with fighting said to be ongoing in the heart of the city. Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky vowed that the cities lost would be won back, but acknowledged the growing toll, saying it was not clear how long the war would last and how many more losses would be needed. Given that depressing prognosis, the Ukrainians will be wanting more US weaponry, such as the high-mobility artillery rocket system they showed off at an unknown location. Ukraine's top general, Valery Zaluzhny, said HIMARS is now hitting targets in Russian-occupied Ukraine. The propaganda continues on both sides. The Russian Defense Ministry was showing off attack helicopters in action. Spokesman Igor Konashenkov claimed 780 Ukraine combatants had been killed, along with the destruction of vehicles. In St. Petersburg, Russian President Vladimir Putin was promising Belarus strongman Alexander Lukashenko Iskander missile systems within a few months. The Iskander can carry conventional nuclear warheads and has a range of up to 500 kilometers. In a meeting, Lukashenko told Putin he was concerned by the repulsive policies of neighbors Lithuania and Poland, allowing NATO flights near Belarus's borders. Matthew Bray, TVB News.
Leaders of the world's 7 largest developed economies are meeting in Germany. During the 3-day G-7 summit, they'll seek to forge closer ties in their opposition to Russian President Vladimir Putin. Meanwhile, thousands of Germans took to the streets protesting at the G7's lack of action against climate change. Nazvi Karim has details.
The grainy black and white faces of the G7 leaders projected onto a ski lift in Ilmenau, Germany, was a desperate call to action. The message was end hunger, solve the COVID crisis, and tackle climate change. But as leaders of the world's 7 largest developed economies arrive today for their summit in the Bavarian Alps, they are likely to pin the blame firmly on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. US President Joe Biden is expected to call on its fellow leaders from the UK, France, Germany, Canada, Italy and Japan to double down on their resistance to Russia, with signs the alliance is cracking.
The last time they met here in Elmau, in Germany, they committed to making sure that at least 500 million people get out of hunger. But in 2022, the number of people in hunger have actually increased by over 140 million people. And so the question now is, it's no longer time for talking and talking, it is time to take action.
That action, though, is unlikely to take the form of any direct measures to beat soaring global inflation. Rather, it will focus on punishing Russia further. While efforts continue to cap Russia's oil and gas exports, the G7 will be looking to also ban Russian gold. Gold is Russia's second largest export after energy, and the aim is to send a clear message to Vladimir Putin that NATO and the G7 are united in their efforts. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said at a press conference that Russia's brutal war against Ukraine is having a major impact on livelihoods, with people increasingly unable to afford food and fuel. One of the major issues for G7 leaders is to stop Putin from targeting food infrastructure in its war and opening up a sea corridor allowing Ukraine to export its vast grain stock to the world to ease the threat of global hunger. Meanwhile, 100 kilometers away in Munich, about 4,000 people protested against the summit, demanding action on climate change and carrying signs criticizing capitalism and imperialism. There was a minor scuffle between police and protesters, but no injuries were reported, and authorities said the demonstrations were largely peaceful.
Wir waren schon im G7 bei der Demo 2000.
This woman, calling for more action on climate change, said she was at the 2015 G7 protest, and nothing has improved since then. Nazvi Karim, TVB News.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson outlined he aims to remain in power until the middle of the next decade. That's despite calls for him to quit after his Conservative Party suffered defeat in 2 by-elections. He said he is focusing on helping the UK through a difficult period with soaring costs of living, in part sparked by the conflict in Ukraine.
When you're the leader of a country, in good times and in bad, you have to think about the criticisms that you get, and you have to recognise that people inevitably, when you're the head of a government that's taking country through a big inflationary price spike caused by the increasing cost of energy, people are frustrated. People are at the filling up their cars and cursing as they do so. I understand that. We have to help them, and I understand people's frustration. Politics is about allowing people to have the democratic safety valve of letting off at governments, but then, such as in by-elections.
Iran is close to resuming talks with the United States on reviving their 2015 nuclear pact, Europe's top diplomat said. In 2018, then U.S. President Donald Trump pulled out of a deal in which Iran agreed to curb its nuclear program in return for relief from economic sanctions. But after meeting Iran's foreign minister in Tehran, the EU's Josep Borrell is hopeful of a breakthrough just 3 months after efforts to revive talks stalled.
The US and Iran will talk, not directly, but with a facilitation by me and my team as coordinator. The negotiations were stalled, no prospect of restarting, and thanks to this discussion, on the coming days they will start again with close contacts between the US and the Iranians. That's a good news.
Welcome back to TVB News. U.S. President Joe Biden has signed Washington's most sweeping bill aimed at tackling gun violence in nearly 3 decades. Biden did so prior to heading to a Group of 7 summit in Germany. The bill's implementation comes after a recent string of mass shootings rocked America. Daniel Rao tells us more.
U.S. President Joe Biden signed the gun violence bill following the approval of both the Senate and House of Representatives. It will enforce stricter background checks on young gun buyers, as well as preventing a greater number of people convicted of domestic abuse from purchasing firearms. The legislation will also implement so-called red flag laws that give authorities more power to seize weapons from those deemed to be dangerous to themselves or others. Much of the bill's $13 billion budget will be put towards strengthening mental health programs, particularly in schools. Schools have been the scene of some of the worst gun massacres in recent US history. However, the law does not include a ban on the ownership of assault-style weapons and background checks for all gun transactions. Still, President Biden said the legislation is going to save lives.
From Columbine to Sandy Hook to Charleston, Orlando, Las Vegas, Parkland, El Paso, Atlanta, Buffalo, Uvalde. And for the shootings that happen every day in the streets that are mass shootings that we don't even hear about, the number of people killed every day in the streets. Their message to us was do something. I don't know how many times we heard that. Just do something. For God's sake, just do something. Well, today, we did. While this bill doesn't do everything I want, it does include actions I've long called for that are going to save lives.
Despite the signing of the bill, gun rights remain a divisive issue in the US. In contrast to the bipartisan legislation, on Thursday the Supreme Court ruled to overturn a New York law that limited a resident's ability to hold concealed weapons. Daniel Rowell, TVB News.
There were rival protests outside the U.S. Supreme Court on Saturday following the decision to overturn the Roe v. Wade precedent that recognized women's constitutional right to abortion. The protesters were split along the lines of those who are demanding abortion rights and those opposed. The ruling by the court is likely to alter American life, with nearly half the states considered certain or likely to ban abortion. U.S. President Joe Biden, who was traveling to Germany for the G-7 summit, said he respected the Supreme Court's decision. He was, however, considering unilateral action to counter what the White House called an extreme ruling. There were protests in many states across America. Missouri became one of the first to make abortion illegal. It was already prohibited there except in cases of medical emergency. Norwegians marched in defiance after Oslo's Gay Pride March was cancelled following a shooting in the capital's nightlife district that left 2 dead and 20 wounded. The shooting, described by the Norwegian Security Service as Islamist terror act, took place early Saturday. The suspect, a 42-year-old from the Kurdish part of Iran, arrived in Norway in the 1990s. Police say he had a criminal record over drugs and weapons offences. The attack was centred on the London pub, a place for the LGBTQ community. The attack was condemned by the Prime Minister of Norway. Norwegian security authorities have raised the country's alert level from moderate to extraordinary. Back locally, Hong Kong customs officers and their counterparts in Macau have seized more than $110 million worth of smuggled goods and cash in a joint operation. This after authorities intercepted 2 river trade vessels. According to the authorities, the vessels were in waters between the 2 special administrative regions. The seized smuggled goods include expensive food ingredients, red wine, and electronic products. 4 men aged between 40 and 76 were arrested. The authorities believe criminals had switched to using vessels for smuggling goods from Hong Kong to the mainland via Macau in an attempt to evade detection by law enforcement agencies. A paper crafting expert has teamed up with over 1,000 school children and young inmates in Hong Kong and the mainland to build a 13-meter-high Chinese-style lantern. Apart from celebrating the 25th anniversary of the handover, the spectacle also seeks to break another world record.
Cyclists, fencers, and many more paper crafts made in the shape of Olympic Games athletes. Just days ahead of July 1st, these figures that complement this 13.3-meter-high lantern at Statue Square in Central have drawn the attention of passers-by. 2 years in the making, the lantern aims to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the establishment of the Hong Kong SAR. The leader behind the scenes is lantern paper crafting master Xia Zhongjian, who said his work has previously broken a world record for the largest hanging lantern. Xia added, but later on the record was beaten by Japan and Thailand, and I think it's time the Chinese people make a world record again, especially when the lantern crafting skill is part of our country's intangible cultural heritage. The expert noted the most challenging part in the craft work is to make sure the middle part of the lantern has to be precisely 9 meters wide. He said for something this big, time is needed to put together over 1,000 pieces onto the lantern. Meanwhile, the lantern also weighs 1.7 tons, and underneath is 20 tons of water hidden below the stage to bear the weight of it. It's also worth noting that this project involves the hard work of primary and secondary school students from 20 schools on the mainland, as well as young inmates in Hong Kong. This year also marks the 40th year since the Correctional Services Department was renamed. One pair of couplets on the lantern marks the department's years of efforts and achievements. The lantern will officially be lit on July 2nd and will continue to shine until October.
That's the news. Thanks for watching.